Shalom and welcome to another edition of the Messianic Hour. I'm your host, Rabbi Scott. This show is dedicated to reaching the lost and educating the found. I'm so glad you're with us today. I'm here with my wife, Judy, as we share the good news of our Messiah from a Jewish and Gentile perspective. It's going to be a great teaching. We have some interesting topics. We'll be looking at Genesis chapter 18 and 19 right this week with the birth of Isaac and some other little tidbits. And then also, we're going to be looking at the Feast of Purim. It's not a biblical feast, but it definitely plays a major role in the Jewish faith, and we're going to be looking at that as well. And so keep in store with that. It's going to be a great opportunity. But Judy, we need to give major kudos out to Kim, our video producer. She has figured out on YouTube how to put our entire 30-minute radio show on one segment, so you can start checking that out. We're also going to start abbreviating the Messianic Hour to TMH. I was dyslexic there. And yes. So you can check that out as well. But check out, we are on YouTube, Vimeo, GodTube, YouTube, MeTube, all the tubes right now, I think. And but check that out. We also have our Droid and Apple apps, so you can check those out right there on your phones, smartphones, and your iPads. So we got a lot in store. It's really cool.
Basically, I think what you're saying, if you know of an area that we're not there, let us know and we'll put it out there.
We're on Facebook, on Twitter. We got them all now.
Yes.
And if you want to Twitter us.
No.
Tweet. My dyslexia just keeps messing that.
You can't do Twitter and tweet.
I can't.
If you want to tweet us.
Tweet us on Twitter. So
yes, your handle.
It's the @
Rabbi Scott
Rabbi underscore Scott. So @ Rabbi underscore Scott, and you can catch us on there as well as we're having fun. And of
I
course
just think
we have
you're
Facebook.
hopeless with that.
I probably am.
Really?
I just certain words.
All right, if you're out there and you're watching and listening to us, just realize he's going to butcher Twitter and tweeter. Twitter, now you got me going.
See, it's not so
Twitter
hard.
and tweet. You're going to just butcher it every single time.
Yes.
So just give him a lot of grace.
Yes, dyslexia is a horrible disease. It affects 5 out of every 4 children.
We're just going to put it out there and let it be known.
But, Judy, we got a great show in store. We're also, if you're interested in the trip to Israel, you got to get it in. The deadline's coming up February 14th. And so let us know about that as well. If you're in the Atlanta area, they could join us at our Purim celebration. Why don't you tell them about that real quick?
February 23rd, we'll have service, and we'll have our groggers and take care of Haman's name. And we're going to have a total Purim carnival. We're going to have inflatables and games and prizes. If you're on our Facebook page, if you find the Congregation Beth Adonai on Facebook, there is a picture of Rabbi getting ready for Purim.
That's right. We have plenty of prizes.
I should post that in the Messianic Hour also.
You should. Food and fellowship.
You are very color coordinated.
Check us out. It's going to be a great time. Remember, you can dress up as your favorite biblical character. No ghosts and goblins, but only those of the Lord. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Messianic Hour.
Welcome to the Messianic Hour. I'm Judy Sekulow, and I'm glad that you're with us today. And we're going to be starting in Genesis chapter 18 through chapter 22. It's 18:1 through 22:24. And so we're going to be finding Messiah in these chapters again.
Right.
And they really kind of center around Isaac. Right,
but before we get into that, we got to talk about 2 things that happened in this chapter. One is, it started in verse 18, so everyone knows what we're looking at is this is when the 3 angels appear to Abraham and tell him about them, that he's going to have the child, and then it's going to go into the situation with Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. But here's a really interesting note. For all of your friends out there who have Orthodox Jewish friends who say you can't eat meat and dairy together, this chapter gives them a little bit of a problem, and we're going to pull it up on the screen. The verse here that talks about it, and it basically tells us in this chapter that Abraham serves to the men that come to him milk and meat, and they eat it together. And your Orthodox friends will say you can't eat meat and dairy together because the scripture says you can't eat an animal cooked in its own mother's milk. and they take that to mean you can't eat meat and dairy together, but yet we see them eating it, and it says he was there with them and they ate together. It's interesting when you ask your friends why, how could this be? The rabbis will say, oh, well, they waited 30 minutes between drinking and eating the meat, but it does not say that. And this is a good way for you to show them, look, what you're necessarily believing isn't exactly the truth. And it's a great thing. And then also, in chapter 19, when we're looking at Lot, we're probably going to look at that next week, but he is going, and the two angels come to him, and he brings them into his house. And there, and as you can see on the scripture as well, as we listed up, that it says that they ate unleavened bread. So we see the first use of matzah in the scripture. Matzah, it's not just for Passover anymore. As we see it here. So I thought it was really interesting. Now let's go into the story.
Well, we see that this week's parsha, these verses, center around the birth and the sacrifice of Isaac. Now,
Right.
we'll probably only get through the birth
Right.
today, but in this segment, we're going to look at and touch on the miracle of Isaac's birth, the miracle of Isaac's sacrifice, and then a midrash on Isaac's life.
Right. And how it relates to the miracle of Yeshua's birth. There's a great connection there.
Right. And so we really see that one of the major promises to Abraham, besides, the land and all that, was what we see fulfilled in these verses, which
Right.
is the birth of Isaac. So, Rabbi, why don't you get going?
Well, we see, as we talked about, God is told to them, you're going to have a child. Sarah, of course, thinks this is kind of funny because both of them are well beyond in their years. And matter of fact, she is beyond the age of giving birth. So she can't give birth. That's why they think it's going to go through her maidservant, which back then the tradition was, if you had a maidservant, the husband could sleep with them, have the child, and that child would be considered a legitimate heir to the inheritance of the father. But we know God has a different plan. And we see here that Sarah is in fact going to give birth. And the rabbis consider this a miracle because she can't have children. Not only can she not have it, she's beyond the age. Although some are skeptical and say, oh, no, this really wasn't a miracle. The scripture is very clear. Isn't God a supernatural God? He can change even the course of nature.
Well, and it's very clear in Genesis 18:11. It says that Abraham and Sarah were old, well on in years, and the manner of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So that tells us right there, Sarah was past the point of she was physically incapable of having children. But we know that, the Lord can accomplish things that he can work outside the bounds of nature.
Right. But again, the rabbis very confused on this, the rabbinical interpretation. They become very creative on some of this. One of the responses was, because the Holy One, blessed be He, yearns for their prayers and supplications, and why she didn't get pregnant. But yet another one, another rabbinic interpretation of the story is really fascinating because it explains about how it was Sarah, who was so advanced in years, was able to have Isaac, was simply, again, God performing a miracle. And this was a key thing with my father, sharing my faith with my father, because he said, how can you believe in the virgin birth? Well, if you could believe in the birth of Sarah well over her 90s having a child, what's the greater miracle? A woman who is too old to have a child, to have one, compared to a virgin having one. Both of them are impossible, but nothing is impossible for God.
And I think it's interesting that we see what the rabbis have to say in this, because they're the ones who this has been passed down. They're the ones who study, the Torah and get their interpretations of it. And we also know that the first disciples, were well versed in the Torah, but also in what the rabbis had to say about it. Right. So what we kind of see here is many, many years in advance, we see kind of God planting this seed among the rabbis that, hey, there is such thing as a miraculous birth.
And the rabbis also compared this miraculous birth to the resurrection of the dead, another miracle that only God could do. why can only God do these things? He's literally changing the course of nature, of science. We know scientifically we can't, but with God we can. Another example is when God stopped the sun from setting with Moses in the battle. When he raised his arm, the sun said it stood still. Science knows that can't happen, but with God it does.
Well, and again, I think it's really interesting that God had set this up, that there is a miraculous birth. There's a way to give birth that defies the laws of nature. So, here you've got Sarah, whose, womb was closed, giving birth, and everybody accepts it as a miraculous birth after the fact and through the years.
Right.
And then you have this maiden from Galilee named Miriam, who ends up having a miraculous birth.
As a virgin. Right.
Here's the same, God has already set this up for us.
And this is a great way when you're sharing with your friends and they're questioning, how can you believe in the virgin birth? Well, how can you believe that Miriam gave birth to, Sarah gave birth to Isaac when she was beyond, both of them, if you go to a doctor, the doctor will tell you both are impossible. And that's the key thing to show them, look, if God could do this with Sarah, why could he not do this with Mary? And that's really where we see the importance of bringing this all together and understanding the purpose of it and how God is setting the stage for the birth of Messiah, and how we're going to see that all connect, and how Isaac and Messiah relate so well.
They relate. It's like they're running on a parallel.
Yeah.
And Isaac is foreshadowing those things of Messiah. Here's Isaac's supernatural birth and fulfillment of a promise.
Right.
And then you've got Yeshua's supernatural verse, fulfillment of a promise. So you've got Isaac going, foreshadowing all these things that are going to be happening with Messiah.
Right. Both of them, and we're also going to see that with the sacrifice too. So their lives parallel each other in such a unique way, and we really see how the rabbis, not only the modern day rabbis who understand it this way, but the rabbis at the time of Yeshua and the disciples, they understood this as well, because both the scriptures in Romans and Acts that both talk about that. We see this idea of the resurrection of the dead.
Well, and I think that one thing that's very important to point out here is both the Tanakh and the Brit Hadashah, the New Covenant, both teach repeatedly that God intervenes in human history,
right,
and he sometimes overrules the natural course of events. So the things that we read in the Tanakh, right, of parting the Red Sea, miraculous verse,
the 10 plagues, all those things.
We shouldn't be surprised when we see that in the Brit Hadashah also.
Right. How does God part the waters? I mean, that's pretty amazing. But God can do the supernatural, and that's really what we're seeing take place, is God setting the foundation for what's to come with the birth and the miracles that are going to take place with his Messiah. And that's the point of what we're seeing here. And that's what we really have to understand as we start delving deeper into the miracle and then the sacrifice of Isaac, how they parallel the promise of the coming Messiah. Abraham, the first father, was willing to give up his son. God, our Father, is willing to give up his firstborn as well. We're getting ready to go into the next segment. I want to remind you to go to the website, rabbiscott.com. Sign up for our newsletter. You can check out and plant a tree in Israel. You can tweet us on Twitter. And also check out, remember we are a listener-supported show, so please feel free to support us online or through the mail. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to the Messianic Hour.
Welcome to the Messianic Hour. I'm Judy, Sekulow, and I'm glad that you're still watching and listening to us today as we finished talking about Isaac, but we do have a celebration coming up.
That's right.
And we always want to, in advance, kind of tell you guys about it, tell you how to celebrate it. And this is, as you said, the Feast of Purim. It's not a biblically mandated feast.
Which means it doesn't come from the book of Leviticus. It's one of two major holidays that the Israelites celebrate that are not ordained by God.
Purim and Hanukkah.
Purim and Hanukkah. But while we never see Yeshua celebrating the feast of Purim, we do see that he mentions that he celebrates the feast of Hanukkah, and this is also why we can celebrate the birth of our Messiah and the resurrection. We just need to do it in a biblical way. That's why we do it on Sukkot for his birth and the Feast of First Fruits as we recognize the resurrection of our Messiah.
And this is a holiday that we see that, again, as you talked about, it has to do with a miracle. God operating outside of the laws of nature again, kind of. But 2,000 years ago, when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, the Jewish people were sent away and forced into exile in Babylonia. And 50 years after that, Babylonia was defeated by Persia. And during the second Persian king rule, King Ahasuerus, or however you say that.
Xerxes.
Xerxes. He was a little egotistical, you could say.
He was a king.
Yes, he was. And he decided he needed a new capital. So he wanted to commemorate his new capital, the capital of Shushan. And with that, he had a tremendous feast. And he invited everyone. And he had all these people come. And everybody was afraid to not come because you don't want to disobey the king.
Well, basically, if you disobey the king, you die.
True. Yes, that is true. And the king got a little too happy, had a little too much to drink, and he wanted his Queen Vashti, to come out and dance. But this wasn't just your typical dance.
Yes, that's exactly right.
She was a very beautiful woman, so it said, and he wanted everybody to be able to view her beauty, so to speak.
In all her natural state, we'll just say.
Yes. Well, she refused, and he was basically insulted and embarrassed, and he decided to have her killed.
Right.
So he got...
Or to get rid of her, because some commentaries say that she actually lived, but we don't know that, but she's not mentioned anymore.
Well, usually if you're not mentioned
That
anymore...
would be a good thing.
It's a good... yeah, to think that you're just kind of gone.
That's why I like to get... sometimes you got to share everything.
Yeah, well, no, you don't have to share everything. No, honey.
Well, obviously she did.
Exactly. So he needed a new queen. So they sent out and he wanted someone who was even more beautiful than Vashti.
Right.
So he had his men going from house to house in all of Persia, taking away the young girls to Shushan, where they were basically kept as hostages until they could appear before the king and he could say yes or no.
Well, there was a year in which they were bathed in oils and all this stuff, I guess, to make their skin look, smooth and soft and natural. So that's where we see that come into place as well.
And in Shushan, we had a Jewish orphan by the name of Hadassah who lived with her uncle Mordecai. And when they came to get her, Mordecai told her to go and said, tell them your Persian name, Esther, because, we don't want to create any problems here, and God's going to watch over you. So Esther went. She was very kind, very gentle, but she was also very beautiful. And when the king saw her, he chose her as his new king, not knowing, though, that she had a little secret. And that little secret was that she was Jewish. So she was in the king's palace now, subject to all of the intrigue that goes on in the palace. And one day when her uncle was there, he happened to hear two men plotting.
Uncle Mordecai.
Yes, to kill the king. Well, he warned Esther, and the two men were caught and killed. And although it was recorded in the king's royal book that he had saved the king, the matter, just because nothing had really happened, it just kind of got pushed away. Okay, that's nice. Yeah.
I'll give you something later.
Yeah. Well, soon after that, the king appointed the evil man Haman.
Boo.
Okay, would you like to explain to people why you're doing that in case they're listening to the show for the first time?
Every time you hear the name Haman, boo, you're supposed to boo it out because he is an evil person.
Because you want to blot his name out.
So you'll hear people using groggers and booing, and that's why we do that. But I'll only do it this one time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Unlike the congregation where your grogger sounds like a machine
Yes,
gun.
it is a heavy-duty grogger.
Yes. So when the king appointed him as the new prime minister, all the king's subjects were ordered to honor Haman and bow down to him. Well, Mordecai refused to do it because that's kind of giving honor that's only reserved to God.
Right. It's like
to
bowing
someone
down
else.
to a god.
Right. So he just really, really got mad at Mordecai because Mordecai wouldn't give him the honor that he felt was due to him.
Right.
And as a consequence of that, so to speak, Haman started to plot to have, and he knew Mordecai was Jewish.
Right.
He started to plot to have all the Jewish people killed.
Right.
Again, Esther heard about this, and Mordecai heard about this, told Esther, and Esther and Mordecai working together decided that they needed to approach the king to tell him.
Right. Well, and one of the most important lines comes from this, which is that she was put in this place for such a time as this. God had planned this out, and we see her in the courtyard in the role of queen. But as you said, you had to be asked to go before the king. You couldn't just go, and so she had all the Israelites, all the Jewish people, fast for 3 days, and then she went before she had the courage to go and really break the law of the king and go before him, and he welcomes her in. And what happens next?
Well, Esther invites the king and Haman to a private banquet.
Right.
And when the king asked her, well, what is your wish? What may I grant you? You are my queen. He's
willing to give her a third of everything he has.
That's right. He said that, she basically said that, I'm very concerned. There's someone out to harm me. And
right.
At this, she reveals that she's Jewish, and Haman is trying to kill her and all of her people.
Right.
But we know that
once the king puts a seal, it can't be changed. So what he does is he brings out the understanding and changes the law that the Israelites are able to defend themselves. And we see here that God defeats the enemy and saves the Jewish people. And instead of the Jews being put on the gallows and hung, Haman and his children are put on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see here the connection of how God takes a bad situation and turns it good. So now, the way we remember this is we celebrate the Feast of Purim. And we remember, what's interesting, Judy, in the entire book of Esther, what is not in there? The name of
God.
Right. So we see God not mentioned at all in the scripture, yet we see him all throughout it. God's presence is all throughout it. So we celebrate it by dressing up in costumes, making little hamantashes, the delicious little cookies that look like the pocket.
They're like a triangle.
Yeah, that looks like the handkerchief of Haman.
Well, you read the story of Esther,
Right.
And you typically send gifts of food.
Right.
You have a festival meal.
And if they want to send food, our address is on the website. But you have a festive meal. It's a lot of fun. We do a Purim party here. Kids come out. We inviting everyone to come join us. It's a time of just fun and joy, and that's really what it's all about. Using a great thing. So if you want to come, it's on our website. Remember,
February 23rd.
We ask you to dress in a biblical character, and it is a great way of doing it. Getting ready to end up the show. Remember, we are a listener-supported show. Please feel free to go online and donate. You can also plant a tree in Israel right there on the website. And again, in a couple weeks, we'll be celebrating the Feast of Purim. Don't forget about our Israel trip. The deadline is February the 14th. We're going out June 3rd through the 13th. Until next week, this is Rabbi Scott
and Judy
saying shalom and pray for the peace of Jerusalem.